I went to the School for Field Studies in Kenya. So the School for Field Studies is a study abroad program, and they have different locations like all over. Ida went to Australia, and we have another friend who went to Patagonia, but mine was in Kenya. And we were right along the border. The little red upside down teardrop is where we were, right along the border of Kenya and Tanzania. So every day we could see that view, and we could see Mount Kilimanjaro when it was clear enough, which was really cool. The lowest blue star is Kilimanjaro. The highest blue star is Nairobi, which we were about 6 hours drive from. And then the leftmost blue star is Masai Mara, and it borders the Serengeti. We got to go there halfway through the semester and go to the Ol Pejeta Conservancy, where they have the last 2 living southern white rhinos, which is really special. I took 4 classes while I was there, so we were there for 3 months. The first month was mostly classes, and the program focus was endangered species conservation. So I took conservation of endangered species, human dimensions of endangered species conservation, ecology of endangered species, and then we also took Swahili language and culture. So I got to learn a little bit of Swahili and learn about the tribe that was in the area that we were, which was very interesting. Okay, so where we were, the tribe was the Maasai, and they speak Ma and Swahili, but Ma is their native language. And one of their main forms of income is beading and selling beads and beaded clothing, because we were right next to Amboseli National Park, so they rely a lot on tourism and tourists to buy products that they make. But the clothes that they're wearing are more like festivity clothes, not necessarily everyday clothes with all the beads, but you can see the shukas, which is the red and blue plaid, and that's what they would wear every day. Everybody around us were agro-pastoralists, so along with relying on beaded products and tourism to support themselves, they also raised sheep, goats, and then they had shoats, and it's a sheep, but it's like a drought. They're especially hardy, and they are good in the face of drought, which a lot of the time it's very dry there.
Point it this way. Change slide.
So this was, I couldn't find the picture of the guys that were in our cohort, but there were 6 guys, and then these were all the girls. This is us on the Kenya-Tanzania border in Masai Mara. And behind us, there are prescribed burns. We were there for part of the dry season and then part of the wet season, even though it wasn't very wet. They were still in a drought while we were there. So they do these prescribed burns to prevent the spread of wildfire. And when we were driving along this road, we could see all of the birds were right along the fire line, eating all the insects that were being flushed out by the fire, which was really cool. Okay. While we were there, we ate very good food, but a lot of it was the same most days. So in the middle, the kind of cake thing you see is ugali, and that's corn flour and water, and you dip it in whatever meat you're having. We ate a lot of goat, and then the bowl to the top right of ugali is cabbage, which we also ate a lot of. So every day I had goat, rice, cabbage, and ugali probably twice a day for the whole semester. This was us trying goat for the first time. It's definitely an acquired taste, but we learned to love it. So the first month we spent taking classes. We would go out every week into the national park and do field surveys, population surveys of different animals. We would sex the animals, age them, just get a kind of a holistic picture of the Amboseli ecosystem, which was really, it was cool to see, and I've never seen any of these animals before. So that's a Maasai giraffe, which are only in that area that we were in, Kajiado County. And then that's a Grevy's zebra, which looks like a normal zebra, but the big ears are their defining feature. That one is very pregnant. Yes, yeah, it is. Yeah, we saw so many elephants and baby elephants too, which was really exciting to see. And then the egrets follow the elephants around and eat the bugs off of their backs. More elephant pictures. I think I probably saw as many elephants as I did zebras. We saw a lot of hyenas, which I was very excited about. The one on the left is a baby hyena, and then the bottom right picture is a pregnant hyena and one of her pups, and they had a part of a hippo that I guess they had been eating for multiple weeks, which was interesting. Yeah. We saw lions, not a lot of lions, but when we did see them, they were very close, which I was super excited about. We only saw solitary female lions, so we didn't see any males. Another little picture of the lion. We saw gray-crowned cranes, which are critically endangered, but there was one day we were driving and we saw 30 of them all together, and one of my professors studies gray-crowned cranes and has for like 20 years, and he was so excited, and he said he'd never seen so many together at once. And we even got to see chicks, which are in the right picture, and they look a little bit like baby ostriches, so we had a couple people get confused. Baby zebras too. We were in the fall cohort gets to go and they get to see the Great Migration when they go to Masai Mara and the Serengeti. We didn't get to see that, but we got to see all of the baby animals, which was equally as fun. Lots of giraffes. We spent one day going out around the national park, and then a lot of the land surrounding the national park is owned by private conservancies, so they have agreements with the Maasai tribes there where they're allowed to go and graze their herds, but there's no building or development, and then tourists also aren't allowed to drive through the conservancies, but because we were doing ecosystem research and population research, we were able to drive through, and we took pictures of the left sides of giraffes and put it through this program that has a big database of giraffe pictures from that area. And based on the way that their spots interlock, they can identify the specific giraffes just from the left side, which is very cool to see and cool to learn how to use that program. Lots of cheetahs too. I think we saw 8 cheetahs total. The 2 on the right picture were part of a bigger group of 5, and they're like a famous group of cheetahs in Masai Mara that grew up together. And we got to go to the Masai Mara Predator Conservancy and have a guest lecture about cheetahs, and they are a big concern to researchers right now because of an increase in tourism, and they are very prone to heart diseases and stress-related diseases. So they're working on researching that, which was good to hear about. Also saw some flying animals. There were little bats on the right outside of my cottage house. There were 21 of us in a cohort, and we each had a roommate or 2 roommates, and they're called bandas, but it's 2 beds, roof, walls, very minimalist, but there were bats that lived right outside of ours. This was us at the border of Masai Mara and the Serengeti. We got to get out of the car, which was not always allowed when we're in the national park for obvious reasons. This was my professor Kuringe in front of the grubby zebras. Very, very excited. We weren't sure that we were going to be able to see them because they were in a different part of Olpejeta that wasn't always open, but we got to see them, and it's a controlled population, so they're not wild because they were so endangered. So they're fed by the researchers there, but I'm very happy we got to see them. And when we weren't out doing surveys, we were back going through game camera footage that we set up around. So that's a genet on the leftmost picture, and a porcupine and a bushbuck. So it was really exciting to go out and get the SD cards and bring them back and sift through and see what we could see. And our campus had it was maybe a mile long loop around it that was an electric fence. So we set some up on the edge of the electric fence, and some of my classmates got hyenas on their camera, and we could hear them at night, which is a very eerie sound, but it was super cool to see actual pictures of them and know how close they were to us. In our free time, we spent a lot of time painting, we did ping pong, and there was a big platform just outside of campus that we could do yoga at and, look over the bush, which is gorgeous. We also, you can see the bandas in the back of the fire picture. Then we'd have fire pits at night, and some days we could go into town. So we didn't have traditional weekends. We probably did classes and field surveys for 9 days, and then we had a day off every 9 days or so. So we could go into town. The bottom picture is a little bead shop. There's a group for widowed women called the Osalegi Women's Group, and they all make beads, and they have this shop in Kimana Town where they're able to sell their beads. And then the top is just some fruit from the market. So for the second month, we went on expedition, and we went to the Olpajeta Conservancy to see the rhinos and the Grevy's zebras. We went to Masai Mara, which is just massive. It's like 4 times the size of Amboseli. We also got to see the Serengeti. But the thing I want to focus on was the Jane Goodall Institute. So we spent a week there, right on Lake Tanganyika, and that in Gombe is where Jane Goodall did her research and started her chip research. So it's the original site. We had guest lectures that whole week, and a lot of them were from the veterinarians at the Jane Goodall Institute, and they studied the chimps, studied diseases that the chimps had. They also looked a lot at poaching, and the left picture is a bucket of pangolin scales, which I should have included a picture of a pangolin, but they look kind of like armadillos, and they're trafficked a lot and sold for a very high price, but they're taken out of the wild. And so they do a lot to, look at the chimps' health, but also protect them from trafficking, because a lot of people will pay a lot of money for a baby chimp, unfortunately. We spent a couple days doing vegetation surveys. We would hike through the jungle and look at these small plots of land and identify every plant that was in that land. And based off of that, we could do some calculations and get a pretty accurate view of a larger plot. And then we spent a couple days chimp trekking. So we would walk around and look for the chimpanzees, which some days took, I don't know, 3 hours. Sometimes it took 6 hours. But once we got to them, it was well worth it. The picture on the right is a picture that my friend Jordan took of an older chimpanzee. There's us trekking on the top left, and then the bottom left is one of the researchers. So they'll go out and they'll find chimpanzees and follow them for as long as they can that day and note their behavior, what they're eating, how many different chimpanzees they associate with. That's a picture of a baby chimpanzee we got to see. We followed this group of 3 around for a little bit, just walking around, eating. It was really special. And then we also spent a day talking with Dr. Anthony Collins, and he's the baboon researcher at the Jane Goodall Institute. But they have this whole bone room where if they find a deceased chimpanzee, they'll collect the remains and look at the bones and determine the cause of death. And then you can get a pretty good picture of that chimpanzee's life from their bones. So a lot of them had oddly healed fractures with big bone spurs, and we got to take a look at those, and the ones that he's holding down there are very old. They're from when Jane Goodall started doing all of her research and observations at Gombe, which was cool. And then he took us to see Jane Goodall's house, which was right near the research facility. So these are just some pictures of her bookshelf and the shelves she collected and her coffee table. And that quote was a little piece of paper that she had cut out and tacked to her wall. So I thought I would include that. But it was really cool to look around. And then she also had a guest book that people who would come and visit would write a little note in. So we got to look through that as well. And that's our center director and Jane Goodall. So initially for expedition, we were supposed to go to Rwanda. And then there was a war that broke out and it was no longer safe for us to go there. So in 2 weeks, he somehow pulled this together and got us to the Jane Goodall Institute, which the SFS Tanzania program wasn't able to do previously. So I'm very impressed. But we all woke up at 4:30 or 5 one morning to get ready to go for a game drive in Amboseli National Park. And we saw a text from him, and it was a picture of him and Jane Goodall, and then a video of them chatting and laughing, which was very exciting to see. And he's now a member of her board of advisors, and he's also running SFS Kenya, which is the oldest SFS program. He's a very impressive guy. We got to hike to Jane's Lookout, which that picture is a famous picture of Jane Goodall, and then the picture on the top right is us there. A little bit of a different angle, but we got to see the whole jungle, and before, when it was more clear-cut, like in her picture, she could really see the chimpanzees and not have to trek through and follow them so closely. She could look at them from afar. So this is us leaving Gombe. And then the last month, we did directed research. So we split up into 3 groups. One group did gray crown crane research. One group did giraffe bushmeat research. And my group looked at a predator compensation fund, which paid members of the community a stipend to make up for any livestock that they had predated by lions. And we looked at how it fostered coexistence between humans and lions, because human-lion conflict has been an ongoing and growing issue in the area, and especially poisonings of lions that then affect other scavengers have really started to affect the population in a significant way. So this was my research group. There were 6 students, 3 translators, and our driver Harrison in the plaid, and then our professor Mamadi in the back right. So we assessed the effectiveness of this fund by going around and interviewing people from different townships in the area. We'd ask them questions about their views on lions, their views on lions in the ecosystem, in the community, how they felt that their community viewed lions. And then we also interviewed them on their personal experiences with the compensation fund, its effectiveness, how fast they got compensation, whether they got compensation, if they felt that it was equivalent to their loss. So this is pictures from one boma. The big picture is the boma, which is their house, outhouse, where they kept their animals. That's the woman who lived there, some of her goats, and her 2 very cute cats. We did this research, all the interviews, for about a week. We got over 300 interviews. And then we spent another week writing for a very long time. And we ended with a 75-page research paper. And our general conclusion was that the fund was effective. It wasn't necessarily pleasing to the community, but with the budget, so the fund is funded by Big Life, which is a conservation agency, and with the amount of money that they had, they were doling out as many stipends as they could. But our general assessment was that their communication with the community and the expectations that they set up didn't match their ability, which was unfortunate. So they were doing as much as they could, but it wasn't satisfactory to the community, which was fair. We had so many graphs, but I just thought these two were interesting. The one on the right is just a little bar graph of what people thought, their general opinions towards lions. So we had multiple sections of the survey sheet. Some of them were, fill in the blank, how many goats have you had predated by lions? How many sheep have you had predated by lions? And then we had a whole section that was agree, disagree, somewhat agree, somewhat disagree, where we said statements about lions in the community. And then the one on the right is a heat map of reported predation events just in the year that was 2025, which was a significant amount. And the right side of that map, that borders Amboseli National Park, where a lot of the lions are and where they live. And then at the end, we did a community presentation to 200 or so people, a lot of people that we interviewed from the community. We also talked to big life officials, officers who would go out and assess predation events. They all got to come and see what we were talking about and see what we found. And that was it. That was my semester in Kenya. Classes, expedition, research. Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the budget of that compensation fund? Where's that money coming from?
Yeah, it's about $400,000, and it's mostly from, donations. Yeah, they're not for profit, so they rely on donations. But I think there was one specific funder who was very generous and donated a large portion of that fund. So I think they've been having trouble keeping it up year to year, which also, accounts for some of the community disappointment, and they weren't doing the best job at communicating the extent of their fund, which was unfortunate.
When I was over there were little kids, the staff, following the animals out in the brush.
Yeah.
I would have had a shotgun or something because there were lions around.
Yeah.
And so is that the same
Mm-hmm.
model they had there too?
Yeah, it's the same deal. So schools there, you have to pay to send your kids to school, to all the schools. So a lot of the time when families can't afford to send their kids, they have the kids go herd the sheep or the goats or the shoats. And part of how Big Life assesses how much money you get. So if your lion attacked a goat and you lost one goat and its market value was maybe 20,000 shillings, which is $200 or so, they would look at your boma type. So if you had adequate fencing, they would look at where it was attacked. If it was attacked in the boma, you would get more compensation. If it was attacked outside of the boma, you would get less because you're putting yourself at risk. And then they also looked at the type of herders you had. So if you had adults herding and protecting your animals, you would get more compensation than if you had children. So they were trying to make an incentive to keep kids in school and not prioritize livestock herding. So that impacted the amount of money you got. Yeah.
Well, we want to make sure we have time for Ida and Sophia as well. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Anna. This is fabulous. Ida.
So I did a really similar program to Anne. It was also School for Field Studies, just at their location in Australia. So to get a sense of where we were, Sydney is down on the bottom right. So that's where I flew into. And then we took another 3-hour flight up to Cairns, which is up in the north. That's the Queensland area. And we were up in the mountains in the rainforest. And on the left there is the curtain fig. This is a really common type of strangler fig in the area, and it's really famous. And this is like the strangler fig will grow over a host tree, and then eventually the host tree dies, but the fig keeps growing and sending down roots until it makes this incredible structure. So one of the reasons that I really wanted to go to Australia was because all my family lives there. I don't have a lot of family in the US, and so I visited when I was 11, and so that's a picture of my family and I at a Swannies game, and Swannies are the Sydney football club. And so I got the chance to go back and see all my family, and that's me at my great aunt's 90th birthday party. So that was a really big reason why I chose to go to Australia. So we did a lot of really similar things to what Anne was talking about. We went to different places and got some experience doing different types of field research. So we went to the Daintree, which is one of the oldest rainforests in the world, and we learned about mangrove ecosystems and coral ecosystems, and we got to participate in some citizen science efforts to categorize coral and coral bleaching. There's like a citizen science project where anybody can go into the reef and like note down the extent of bleaching in the area and then report it back to a big project that's ongoing. Here are some more pictures from the Daintree. It's a really cool place where the rainforest goes straight up to the ocean, and then there's the inner and outer reef. And it's one of the last surviving places where the reef is not totally bleached, although it's definitely happening and you can see it. We had a week off in the middle, and I got to go to New Zealand and explore Auckland. And one of the things that Auckland is known for are the volcanoes throughout the city. So that middle picture with the grassy hill there is a big volcanic cone, and the Maori people would, their like historical societies would be on the top of these volcanic cones, and then they would store all their food in the like pits at the bottom because it's a good way to protect resources. And then I also got to do this hike and stay in a hut at the top of the Pinnacles National Park, which was really cool, and see some really good views and things. And then the second half of my program, similar to Anne, was a directed research portion. And so my project was working with the Aboriginal people in the area. The Yidinji people Yidinji means rainforest people, so we were working with this family that was half Yidinji and half Barbaram. And they have a cultural tourism business where they take people out and teach them about their culture and their history. And they were really looking to learn back some of their traditional ecological knowledge that had been lost over time. And so we got to help them do some surveys to find out what animals are in the area. And so we did a ton of camera trapping surveys, and we got to go out at night and do spotlighting, which is where you look for eye shine in the trees using a flashlight. And so we basically just camped for 4 days and spent a bunch of time cataloging what we found. We set a lot of traps for dung beetles because dung beetles can tell you a lot about the health of the ecosystem based on how many different species, how many functional guilds those species are filling. And so we collected all these species and then had to spend a couple weeks identifying them. And we spent a lot of time researching what these species' roles in the ecosystem are. Sorry. And then a little bit more day-to-day life. A lot of our food came from a nearby regenerative farm. So we got to go help out and plant trees and help do some work at the farm. And it was really fun to see where the people who cook our food live and grow the food and learn about syntropic farming. There's also a bat hospital in the area. A lot of the bats get stuck in the chain fences or barbed wire. And so there's a big initiative to teach people about how to keep the bats in the area safe. And then we did a lot of like learning different field techniques, sorting through the data that we collected from those field lessons. So these are some wallabies that we caught on a camera trap. And it was a lot of like, there'd be like 400 slides with nothing, and then like one with a wallaby, and then 400 more slides with nothing. And then one of my other favorite things that we got to do was we volunteered at the Tablelands Folk Festival. So we were on the Atherton Tablelands in Queensland, and they have a folk festival every year. And I volunteered at the kids' tent, which was like, the kids were making crafts all day to participate in a children's parade at the end of the day, and that's me in the yellow puppet costume. So I got to be a puppet and walk down the parade and hang out with the kids all day. So that was a lot of fun. And yeah, this is a tree kangaroo that I got to meet. And yeah, the rainforest up there is a really, really beautiful place, and it was so fun to spend 3 months there learning about the animals and the people, and yeah.
Any questions? Is this part of Reed College that you all are sent to these places? Is that in cooperation with?
It's definitely like a partnership.
Okay.
This is not a Reed program, but Reed students often go to SFS. Yeah.
And are you what's your declared major? Are you going into zoology, biology?
Yeah, I'm an environmental studies and biology major, and Anne is also a biology major, and this program is
resident biologist.
Yeah, this program is definitely really good career-wise. We're getting a lot of field experience, and yeah, I think it's part of the reason that Anne and I are able to do the research that we're going to do this summer, because it just provides a lot of credibility and experience to our resume, as well as being a really fun, broad experience. Yeah.
What are you planning on doing this summer?
I'm going to Maine to do seabird research. Yeah.
Carolyn?
Did you gather information about is the, say, butterfly population diminishing, and did you discover things about development and as opposed to the natural life?
Yeah, so it was more of a descriptive study just to see what was there, and I was there in the dry season, and we also had data from the wet season, so we got to see the difference between the two seasons, but not necessarily a bigger picture over time. But one of the goals was also to see if there were any like endangered or at-risk species there, and we found some flying fox species that are on the ICUN red list. And just finding out that information is good for protecting the whole ecosystem, because sometimes like just the way that like conservation legislation works is often to protect like a single species rather than an ecosystem. So if you can figure out that like there are species that are deemed worth protecting by the government, then you can protect the broader ecosystem.
Thanks for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just this button. There's 2 slides to the other way.
Perfect. Okay, so I went to Sydney, Australia without doing field research since I'm a poli-sci major, so no bio for me. But yeah, so I was at the University of Sydney, and so that I just added is the Aboriginal flag. So Australia has, I think, a little bit more of a progressive relationship with their native people than America does. So I'll get to that a little bit later. But yes, this is a little picture of me at the coast and some surfboards. So I was in Sydney, Australia for 5 months, and I got to travel a lot when I was there. I got to go to Melbourne, to Cairns, which is where the Great Barrier Reef is, around where Ida was studying. And then I got to go to Phuket, Thailand, and Queenstown, New Zealand. So I was in the southern island when Ida was in the northern island. And I also got to go to Tokyo. And these are two of my friends who I met abroad. Since Reed is super small and we don't really get to do exchange programs, I wouldn't say anywhere abroad would know to come to Reed, so they send us places. So my program was collecting a bunch of small liberal arts students and putting us all together in the University of Sydney. So my apartment was with 8 Americans from all across the country. And so those are 2 of them from Wesleyan and Florida. And this is us at the Opera House, where we got to see an opera, which was very cool. First time, and it was in Italian. And so we had subtitles, and it was very interesting, I will say. And so this is my, I would say, daily life. So in the far left was a few of the girls I was friends with, since we got to go to very cool like cafes and restaurants, and it's a very international city, so there wasn't too much of, I would say, an authentic Australian experience like maybe Ida had, with a lot of interactions with the Aboriginal people. In Sydney, it's so expensive. The housing crisis is really bad, so it's very expensive there. But there's a lot of international presence, so we got to have a lot of worldly experiences. And at the bottom, we got to go to the beach quite often. My apartment was about a 45-minute bus ride from the coast, so we got to go to the beach after class and maybe in the mornings and whenever we wanted. And right above is kids looking for crabs and looking for little fish. And yeah, there was so many crabs everywhere. It's plentiful. And then there is the bridge, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which is super famous. And if you had the ability to zoom in all the way, you would see people walking on the very top, which is a fun tourist experience people do who are brave enough to walk on the top. Yeah, pretty crazy. And then that is one of the buildings along the coastline in the Sydney Harbour. So that's called Barangaroo, and it is a newly established, I think, maybe more work area. There's a lot of bank buildings over there, but it used to be a whole shipping port, and I took a urban planning class, and my focus was on this area, Barangaroo. And so it just used to be a shipping port, and it used to just be this giant concrete slab. And then the city decided to do a little bit of reinvestment because it was by the their old town. So they had a lot of older buildings from when people first got to the harbor. And so they wanted to make it more of a touristy site and also intermesh with the modern and the old. And so this is just a bar, but it looks quite interesting. So there's a lot of architectural feats over there. They have a big casino that's super famous, that's also super controversial, but it has a bunch of penthouses where famous people like to stay when they're in Sydney. Gambling is a big problem there, but they love it anyways. And this is more of the beach. So I love the ocean from New York City, so I don't get much exposure to some nice blue ocean. And so we got to go and scuba dive quite often, which is the top right corner. This is a little cove. That was our favorite. And we got to see groupers, and what else did I see? Quite a few fish. I think there was a shark in the area when we were there. lots of sharks. This is just, below is just us hanging out at the beach. The water was insane. And then right next to it, the beaches all have a lot of natural pools that just kind of are concreted off sections that will just fill up with ocean water. So when when the waves and the tides are too strong, you could just go into the natural pools and still be in the ocean water. And a lot of people will do their laps there rather than in the ocean. And so that's really cool. It was nice to go in there when the waves were way too strong. And we got to experience the Bondi Rescue lifeguards. So the lifeguarding there is super strong. They have the professional lifeguards, and then they have I think they're called the life helper, life rescue, or surf rescue. I forgot the name, but they're volunteer lifeguards. And so they have ample lifeguards all the time. So they have a lot of extra areas for people to go when it's too strong to go into, or too many sharks. And right above is a cafe that we got to go to with a beautiful lookout point. And then to the far left is my friend and I doing a little like coastal walk, which they have so many of those, just like paths for people to run and walk along the beach, connecting all of the little coves. So beautiful. And so school. So I went to the University of Sydney, and it was very, very beautiful. It's modeled to look after Oxford, and I think it was about like 40,000 students, so much, much, much bigger than Reed College. And I loved it. Obviously at 17, you don't know what school size is best for you, so I'm glad I got to experience both. And so I took a urban planning class, which was really cool to learn about Sydney and architecture. And since I'm political science, I would like to broaden up what I could possibly do in my future. So this was really cool to take. I took an international relations class because I was too scared to take it at Reed College. And I thought it would be very, very cool to take it internationally, but unfortunately I just learned about the US the whole time. So I was the resident fact checker on when everyone would make commentary about the US, which was, a lot of pressure. But, I always stood out in a room with the accent. And I also took a policy-making class, making policy in political times, or something like that. And so it was about how to actually make effective policy when something is happening in the world. And my big focus was about bottom trawling in Australia and their fishing practices, industrial fishing practices. So I got to learn a lot about how far along their environmental water policy is, since I started at Reed as environmental. So I was like, might as well continue and learn a little bit more within Australia. And I learned that they actually have a lot of really good restrictions and tools that they have all these boats use to not get a lot of bycatch, since that's the biggest worry is, bottom trawling, you're just scraping up the floors. And Australia has so many beautiful reefs and historic reefs around it, so it's a huge problem to, only have these specific devices when you're, fishing. And so they have a lot of additional tools that they will incentivize industrial fishers to add to their boats. And I was just making a policy proposal to make it more accessible and more routine. And that is one of my roommates and I in front of one of the main campus buildings, the quad on the inside, is where we're sitting on the grass. It's a very beautiful historic building. And then there's so many cafes and picnic benches outside, and Australia has lovely weather, so we're always doing homework outside and studying outside. And then that was in my political science policy class. We had a man come from the Washington Post, but he was located in Sydney, and he came right when Jimmy Kimmel's whole scandal was happening. So there was lots of questions about media in the US, and he came as a bit of an insight on the inside of what people are doing within journalism and how maybe internationally he feels okay, but because he works for a US company, things were a little up and down, and he was sharing about how people in his field were feeling about journalism. And that was very interesting. And I also took a history class about the Great Depression in Australia, and of course, they loved to say it's the US's fault, which it was. And Australia has a very interesting relationship with the US, even though they were a British colony. So it was very interesting to learn how reliant I think Australia is on the US and our, I guess, just geopolitical relations. And yeah, I learned a lot about their homeless camps in Sydney during the Great Depression and how they formed their own governments, and learned a lot about the 1930s in Australia, and that was very cool. They had beach camps. So a lot of people think maybe it would be like, pretty lovely to be kicked out of your home and then have to live on the beach, but the sanitary problems were quite intense. They got to live in caves along the cliff's edge, so we got to see a lot of historical pictures of people making homes within like alcoves along the cliff, so they have probably this much to walk on. It doesn't matter the weather, whatever, they have to get back to their little homes. It was really insane. And so Sydney also has a lot of good markets, farmers markets, clothing markets, just food tasting. There was so much to do every weekend, which I think inspired a lot of my urban planning class focus. I loved learning about how community-oriented they are there. And so I got to go to the farmer's market nearby school almost every weekend and get some fresh vegetables. And that's me holding, I think it was a leek or a fennel, I can't remember now. And right below is everyone chilling outside the farmer's market. And then to the far left is a mural, which they have so many of, with MLK's I Have a Dream and then the Aboriginal flag. And to the far right is, I think it was a wine tasting festival from their wineries in the area in the New South Wales region. And the Sydney Harbour's in the back. And then below is a thrift market right by school that all the students go to on the weekends. That I took Ida to when she visited to both of those markets. And then food, I was obsessed with all the food options. So a huge thing in Sydney is froyo. I think they're about 10 years behind on obsessions. So in 2016, when we had all of the froyo places popping up, now they have all the froyo places popping up. And this one is called Yochi, and it is everyone's favorite thing. You get it multiple times a week. It's complete chaos. But they have so many locations everywhere, and sorbets, and you can make it healthy. They have regular yogurt, but there was so many topping options, and yeah, it was just insane. And then we lived right by Chinatown and Thai Town, and so we got to do a lot of food crawls often. And so up at the very top in the middle is my roommates. We had an obsession with cheesecake, and so that is a matcha cheesecake and a Earl Grey cheesecake. And so when one of us did something really good in school, we would get cheesecake. And right below is a bowl I would make. Got super into making food bowls because I didn't have the dining hall to rely on anymore. So that was a fun challenge. And then some Middle Eastern food, and then one of my roommates having paella at a food market. And, so animals. Because it's Australia, we got to see a bunch of wallabies and kangaroos, and those are some kangaroos just laying down and napping. And that's a little wallaby standing up right there, and then me feeding another one. We went to a sanctuary to see some animals in Sydney. And then at the top right is when I was in Thailand, a woman came up to me and handed me this animal. And obviously it was a tourist trap, but I couldn't say no because I thought it was a lemur, but I looked it up and it's a slow loris, which are venomous. But she was clearly domesticated and she didn't open her mouth, so I'm going to assume her glands were probably removed. But they are very, very slow and sweet and cuddly and have ginormous eyes. You should probably look it up after. They're quite adorable, but their defense mechanism is venom, so because they're very, very slow. And then that is me with a koala sleeping at the bottom, and I was at the sanctuary, and they said to just go up and like hold her bottom while she was like wedged between two branches, and my friend thought she was taxidermied, but then I think someone like wobbled her branch a little too much and she woke up. And they were like, don't you know that she just sleeps all the time? And so, yes, obviously should have known that. And I will say, because I had a very urban experience, these were my only real opportunities to see animals. So very different than Ida and Anne, where it was very normal to stay far away from them. These ones were unfortunately very used to humans. So this is why I got to get this close and touch this many animals. And then hobbies I took up while I was there. I got really into Pilates and yoga because there was this app that let you try a bunch of places for a free trial to just go to a bunch of different studios. And so I used it because my school schedule was super weird. So certain days I would just try and go neighborhood hopping and go to different Pilates and yoga studios. And that is one right on the beach, so you can look out at the water while you're doing yoga. And then the Blue Mountains is right outside of Sydney. So it's kind of like their Grand Canyon, but it's very blue and luscious and full of eucalyptus trees. And it's very, very beautiful. So it could look like the Grand Canyon, but it's full of trees. And then, so that's us at the bottom hiking. And then that's me at a watering hole or a little waterfall jumping into the water. And then I learned how to surf a little bit. It's a little microwave. But I stood up, and that's the guy being really happy that I stood up. With a huge wave behind him and a little wave that I'm on. And then I also got really into making matcha. They have very cool clubs at the University of Sydney, so they had a matcha club, and I won a free matcha powder whisk, and so I got really, and the girl who was running it was from Japan, so she brought a bunch of stuff from Japan. And they would do matcha crawls, and they would pair up with the run club. And Sydney is all about running. It's like, I think, the way that Sydney thinks. We were just talking about Sydney versus LA. I think LA is work first, beach later, but Sydney's beach first, work later. And so everyone gets up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. before the sunrise, runs to the beach, runs on the beach, on the coastal walks. And so if you try to go around sunrise, it's like sardines, people running. You can't walk. You can't observe the beach. It's everyone's just running before they go to work. They go in the water, they get their coffee, they shower, they get to work. And so it's their 5 to 9 before their 9 to 5. And so yeah, Sydney's very, very active and into health. And but it's really hard to not be because it's just so sunny and so hard to be sad when you're there. And yeah, so then I got to Melbourne, and so this was me at, I think, gosh, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was a historical building. I think it was like they used to have a lot of performances in there, and so that's a water fountain, and that's the inside of it. And then it's a very cool city, so there's a lot of fun murals and graffiti around, so there's me in an alleyway. And then to the right is a really famous croissant place where you can watch them make the croissants as you're eating them. And they had lots of fun flavors and pastries. And so it was really fun to just observe all the chefs rolling up all their croissants while we were eating them. And then that is a meal we had where, unfortunately, we did try kangaroo. So in the little meat rolls at the top, So kangaroos are viewed as pests, like deer are. So they run into the road and you'll hit them and get in a car accident. So people are very angry all the time with kangaroos. And so I heard so many stories from Australians like getting into accidents because a kangaroo would jump into the road. And so they were like, well, you're here, you should try some. So they have a vendetta against them. And so I tried a little bit of kangaroo, but I felt really horrible about it. And it didn't, I don't eat too much meat, so I didn't really know what to compare it to, but one of my friends said it tasted like deer. So I guess that's a good equivalent. Yeah. And then I got to go to the Great Barrier Reef and see the reef, which is definitely dying. Very, not as colorful as it probably used to be. But this is us snorkeling out in the water. It was very, very beautiful. We did go, once we were all the way out there, it was very overcast and windy, so my snorkel kept filling up with water. So it was an intense situation. But the reef was very beautiful, and we did see a lot of colorful fish once we ducked down enough. And then I got to go to Thailand for my spring break since the seasons are switched. I was there and I went to one of the only ethical sanctuaries in Thailand because they still use elephants for, I think, entertainment and also logging. And so at this sanctuary was only retired older women elephants. And so they're all older, over the age of 40, and the oldest one was in her 90s. And you can tell by the way their spines are shaped, and I guess the markings on their ankles, whether or not they're used for logging versus entertainment. And that was pretty sad. But they're all very happy there, and they all had one guy follow them around. He was like their babysitter. And so they get to go, they had so much land and property, the elephants were just allowed to go anywhere they wanted, and the guys just followed them around just to make sure nothing happened. But yeah, they all had like a little keeper that they thought were very like cute and small, like since elephants are so much larger than us, they think we're kind of cute. And I remember asking our guide whether or not they had any vendettas or whether or not they held grudges against how they were treated before, and whether or not it was like shown to the people who take care of them now. And he was like, no, they don't. That's because that was all they knew, so they don't really have, like, they don't show any hatred towards humans that take care of them because of how they were treated in the past, which I thought was really sad, that they don't hold the same grudges no matter their treatment. And then that was Old Town, so that was a really pretty old building. And then 7-Eleven there is much different than 7-Eleven here, so it was really fun to go around and see all the snacks. And yeah, it was really cool. And I still have some like beauty products that I bought there. And that was, at the very bottom, is a old town floating. So there's so many of these islands you can see in the back on the coast. So we went to, I think it's called Panyan Bay, and there was a bunch of islands, and this was an Indonesian island of people who came and built on like their homes and their everything's on stilts, so nothing is really on land, it's just kind of on the shore. And the one building that actually is on land is their mosque, so it's like the only Muslim island in that area. It's just solely Muslim. And so you get to go and come up in these little boats and have lunch, and they have little like tourist areas. And then that is Maya Bay, which is in a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, I think. The beach.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's the beach. And we got to see little sharks. It was under restoration for a really long time, and we got there the day after the day it opened. And so the water was very, very clean, and they didn't let anyone sit down on the sand in case your bathing suit dyed the sand. They wanted to stay really pristine and untouched by people. So we weren't allowed in the water, and they were having research groups go out and like with these big contraptions and their scuba gear going into the water when we were there, just to, I think, observe the sharks that were in the area. And yeah, Thailand was really beautiful. And then I got to go to New Zealand, and we did lots of hikes and saw so many little sheep. And yeah, it was really insane to see all of the mountains. I think we must have been once all the babies were born, and all of the livestock just kind of go right next to the roads and really aren't bothered by people, but they are a little curious. And so they would kind of come up next to our window of the car and like look in, the cows, before I guess they were yet traumatized by cars or something. Yeah, so this is Queenstown in the southern island. And yeah, we went to a lot of glacier hikes, summit hikes. It looked pretty like Oregon, I would say, with how mossy the trees were. So I thought that was really beautiful. Yeah, and then I got to Tokyo on my way back to the U.S. One of my best friends goes to school there, so I got to see her, and she showed me around. And I'm obsessed with Japanese food, so it was really, really cool to have as much udon as I wanted. And we went thrifting, and I found this place called the New York Joe Exchange, and I thought that was fun, and I got some really cool shoes in there. And yeah, we just food hopped, ate as much as we could, saw as many temples as we could. Her grandma lives by Mount Fuji, so we went and visited her and stayed with her, and she took us driving like a maniac up towards Mount Fuji, which was really fun. And then, yeah, we got to make okonomiyaki and yakisoba at this restaurant with the big plate in front of you, and I was really bad at flipping the pancake, and it went everywhere, so she took over for the next round. But yeah, and yeah.
Any questions? Yeah. Now we want to go. Thank you so much for sharing these adventures. Well done.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
I really didn't know what to expect.